Hey, and welcome to this introduction in Excel. In this session, we're going to look at the basics of operations, how to make calculations, and how to format a cell. So when we are making calculations, or when we are entering things into cells in Excel, we entered numbers before, and then we get it visualizes the numbers in the cells, and we see each cell contains sort of one unit or one operation, one thing that we put in and one thing that we get out. So if we want to show two different things, we use two different cells. But here we showed just putting in regular numbers. But Excel obviously is much more than that, and it's useful because, well, first of all, the most basic thing that it can do is that Excel can do everything that our calculators can do. So it's very good at calculation. How do we calculate things, and in what order do we calculate them? Well, when we want to calculate something in Excel, we start by writing an equal sign. There are a few other ways to do it as well, but the easiest is just we write an equal sign. And we, for example, can write 2 plus 5. And then Excel will say, okay, so equals 2 plus 5. And what do we get? It calculates that to 7. So here we now see we've entered an expression or an operation into Excel telling them do this. And Excel does that and displays the answer. So when we click on here, we see that the answer is 7. But we see up here in the formula bar that this is what we entered in, equals 2 plus 5. We can also see what it is by pressing F2. And there we go, and we go sort of into the cell and see what was our input. I press ESC to jump out, or I can also double click to get the same, to jump into the cell, so to speak. See, what did I put in? And ESC again to see what I displayed. We can also go to formulas and show, so in our ribbon here to formulas and go show formulas, and then it'll instead of displaying what the output is or what the result is, instead we see in the cells the formulas that we used. See, it also changes the column width a bit. So here we see what our formula was. It's usually not something we use a lot, so it could be good to get an overview because it does it for every cell, not just the one we're in, but usually it's not something we want to have enabled. Oops, here, home. And so when we do calculations, how do we do them? How does it work? Well, let's go first over the basics of operations as we remember them from school. We have 4 basic operations, or and that are prioritized in 4 different rankings, so to speak. The most important, or the thing that comes first, is parentheses, and then we have exponents. We can display it with that symbol there, and then we have multiplication, times, or we can write a little star there, and then we have star and division, and we have addition and subtraction. And those are the 4 different kinds of priorities that Excel has. It starts, we'll always do, and this is the same as mathematics, we'll always do parentheses first, and then we'll do exponentiation, and then we'll do multiplication, division, and then addition, subtraction. We'll see here when I press enter, though, that it will have a problem with this plus minus. We get a little pop-up, and it says this is an incomplete formula. It has an operator like plus or minus, not followed by an operand. That is, an operand is something that is being operated upon, like the 2 and 5 we had here. Try one following. Change it, fix it. So, and why is that? Because when we write equals 2 plus 1, for example, it calculates the 2 plus 1. So it understands I need to calculate this. We see alternatively, if we just write 2 plus 1, nothing happens. We need that equal signs there. So let's double click here. We see the difference. Here we have equals 2 plus 1, and here we didn't. But we can, instead of writing equals, we can write plus as well. So there we go. plus 2 plus 1. And you see it translate that to equals. So it's the same. It gives the same message to Excel. This is a calculation. So when we wrote here plus minus, Excel thinks, well, if you write a plus first, just like if you do an equal sign first, or if you do a minus first, you want to calculate something. So I expect there to be a 3 here or something like that. Plus 3 minus 1, that's great, that's 2. I can do that. And I'll change the plus to an equal sign. But we don't want that to be the case in here. We just want to write plus minus. So now we've encountered our first issue in Excel. What do we do? How do we solve this? And well, the best thing to do if we encounter this kind of problem is, of course, in general, what should we do when we encounter a problem in software? Well, if we can't figure it out on our own in the next 10 seconds, we Google it and see what Google has to say. And if we do that, we'll see that, okay, so the way to get around this, what is it we actually want? Well, we want Excel not to treat this as a calculation, just treat it as a plain input. Just display this. Don't do anything with it. Just show what I put in. Whatever I put in, I want you to show as output as well. I don't want you to make any calculations as we did here. How do I get around that? Well, we see that the solution is to do an apostrophe. If we write an apostrophe first, it says to Excel, everything afterwards is what I want you to display. So we put an apostrophe there, press enter, and we see just displays plus minus. You can make a little like that, just like we can do here as well. And we see here it's not a problem because it doesn't interpret these as anything to calculate. But if we have something that wants to calculate, we can do an apostrophe and it will display it just as we put it in. Of course, it will hide the apostrophe because we don't necessarily want to show that. What happens if we want to show the apostrophe? Well, we just add another apostrophe and then we get the apostrophe there. And if you want 2, we just add another one and so on. It just hides the first apostrophe. And of course, so we could add apostrophe here as well. We see, but it doesn't make a difference. But it can also be done in this case. And so for here, if we write equals 2 plus 5, or rather, let's cut and paste this. So Control X, Control V. If we want to say that this, what is this? Well, this was 2 plus 5. That's what we wrote in here. That was our input. Of course, we can't put that up there. We'll just get the same output, 7. But we can put an apostrophe there, and then we get that. So we see that that it's quite useful if you want to display what our inputs are and what we put into the cell, and not just display the output. But in the order of operations, we see that Excel does parentheses first. So that's first, and this is second, third, and fourth. So it will always do parentheses first, and then exponents, and then multiplication, division, and then addition, subtraction, just like in regular mathematics. If we have, for example, 2 plus 5 times 3, we will do the multiplication first. 5 times 3 is 15, and then plus 2. So it's 17, and we'll see that here. So that's right, equals there, and we see we get 17. So I put a little parenthesis there. I can see that if I press F2, go into the cell, and then I remove the parenthesis to get the result here. What do I want? If I want to do the plus first, well then, of course, the thing we prioritized first is the parentheses. So I put an apostrophe here before. Is a parentheses. So if we put a parenthesis, then obviously it will do that first. So then we get 2 plus 5, 7 times 3 is 21. An apostrophe there so we can see it. Control C, Control V, copy paste. Of course, Command on Mac. So Command C, Command V. And then we see we get 21. And of course, we also have exponents. So let's do that. Let's do a little exponent here. Well, we can do its own actually. Equals 2 plus 5 times 3. What if we have an exponent here? 2 to the power of 3. What's 2 to the power 3? That's 2 times 2 times 2. That's 8. So 5 times 3 is 15. 2 to the power 3 is 8. 8 plus 15 is 23. So we get 23. And we see then that it does that in that order. And I think this should be intuitive to most of you. But we do parentheses first, exponents second, multiplication, division third, and addition, subtraction last. So again, here we see, let's have another example, the last one. We have 2 to the power of 3 times 2. And what do we get? We get 16. So we see that it's 2 to the power 3, that's 8, times 2 is 16. So it's not 2 to the power of 3 times 2. Then we'd have to add a parenthesis, which is 2 to the power of 6, which is 64. So there we get 64. So we should keep that in mind. Now, one thing we note that you might have noticed here is that when we do these calculations, when we treat them, what do we get? We get a number. And Excel sort of takes the output of the cell, what it displays, the 17, and it says, I know that you put this formula in here, this equation, but this is what then the result is, and that's what I'm going to work with. So this is what we get. And so it displays this, and it displays it as this number. And Excel is quite smart, and it's quite intuitive in the way it's been done, and it has because it's been around for a long time and it's been continuously updated. So several features in it that allows us and helps us to sort of see if there are any errors or see how things are, sort of what Excel is doing. And one aspect of this is that it categorizes the output, what it displays in cells, into different categories. And the two most common ones is numbers and text. And one way that Excel differentiates between the two is how it displays them, or specifically where it displays them. So if we have text, we can write text into a cell. So we'll do that. We'll say hello. And a number, we can write number into a cell, and we get a number. And what is the difference between these two? Well, we see it right here is this one is to the left, and this one's to the right. We see that. So this one is over here on this side of its cell, while this one's on that side. And this is a way for Excel to show us where it is, or rather what it has categorized the cell as. So we see now, okay, so this is text and this is Excel imagines this as text and imagines this as a number. Now, in this case, it might be obvious. So we might think, well, obviously this is a number and this is text. Why do we even need this extra bit of information to show us that? I can see that myself. I'm not stupid. However, there are cases that are more nuanced and more difficult to see what is what. So we see, for example, here that this is a number. Even though we put in a formula here, the result is a number. Well, this is text, and this because we said treat it as text. And we see that immediately because this is to the left and this is to the right. So it's not what it is in terms of, is this text really? I mean, those are numbers, right? It's more, what does Excel think this is, or what does Excel treat this as? And Excel is telling us, I'm treating this as text. And remember this apostrophe. What happens if I write apostrophe and then write some numbers? We see it's put to the left. And if it's to the left, that means that Excel is treating this right now as text. It's not treating it as a number. It looks like a number, just like this, but it's not a number. And how do we know that? Well, we can see that easily because it's to the left. We also get a little information note here, the little green triangle. That means, oh, something special is happening here, where Excel has a little comment about it. And we get this little exclamation mark and says, the number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe, which is true. That's what we did. We put an apostrophe here. So they even give us an extra warning in this particular case, but that might not always happen. So it's good to be to be aware of this. Now, we might not always want it to be this way. This is just the default the default setting to let us know. But okay, I'm fine with this being text and this being a number, but I don't want the text to be to the left. How can I change it? Well, we just go up here and we just use this, right? The right aligned. Or we can do both have left aligned or both be in the middle. We can decide what we want. But if we right align them, then we get it and rather to be like this. And that can be nice. And we see this is especially useful, this Excel telling us what's going on with regards to the decimal sign. Now, decimals are in some countries determined to be the decimal period, and in some places the decimal comma. So which one should we use? Or rather, which one is Excel using? Is it treating the decimals as with the period or with a comma? How does it differentiate? So let's look at that. So we write 215, or I can start with the period actually, 215.21 and 215, comma 21. And we see here that this is to the left, this is to the right. So which one do we think Excel treats as a number? I think most of you now are saying that this is the one that's a number, and thus it means that Excel is using the decimal comma here, not the decimal period. And this is an issue, for example, if we get a file that's different, or if we take numbers from the internet and we just put them in, or we make a mistake when we write, so we accidentally use the period instead of the comma. So if you have a few numbers like this, we can add a few more. Something like that. Then we can immediately, once we're aware of this left-right aspect, we can see that, okay, this is not correct. We might have not noticed it otherwise. So that is good to know. So what do? We go in here, we can press F2 or double click it and change that, and we see it goes to the right. Now, this that it's to the left or to the right, that is just the default setting to show us what Excel treats it as. It's not what causes Excel to treat it this way. What does that mean? That means that, well, remember what we said, we can just go here and click right aligned. This fixes the problem visually. So now this looks okay in a sneaky way, so to speak, because it doesn't fix the problem. It's not the reason that it doesn't treat this as a number. It still treats this as text. It still doesn't think that this is a number. It just doesn't show that because we forced it to be right aligned. So we just remove the symptom, not actually the cause or the problem, just the symptom of the problem. So we should also be aware of that. How do we see that that's an issue? Well, here, for example, if we write equals this plus 10, we see that I can add those two together. And I did that by referencing here. We'll get a bit into referencing later on. But we see that I can add this together with something. Or rather, I can write here equals this plus 10. It's not a problem. But this one here, if I write equals this one plus 10, I get an error. There's a problem. Why is there a problem? Because it isn't a number. Excel doesn't treat it as a number. So we need to keep that in mind and be aware. So, okay, but let's say we have all this data with the decimal periods or decimal commas, and Excel is using decimal commas. We don't like that. We want to use decimal periods. Can we change that? Yes, we can. So we go here to File, we go to Options, and we go to Formulas, or rather, let's see. No, it's Advanced. So we go to Advanced. And in Advanced, we see here, use system separators, and the decimal separator is a comma. And I can't change that. I click here, nothing happens. I have to unclick the use system separators and click in a period there. We also have a 1000 separator. Usually we don't need one. but that's personal preference. But we can just click in the period there, click OK. What happens? We see that all these commas change to period. This one didn't. It didn't change to a period. And if we stop forcing it to be right aligned, it's still going to be left aligned. But now that this, so this period didn't become a comma or something like that, it remains the same. But we see here that this one now can be, right, equals this plus 10. We now can add it together, so it now works. So if it's using another symbol like a comma, it will change those to periods, but those that were periods can now be added together. So that's a good thing. Or can now be used in that sense. Now, when we're working with decimals, an interesting thing is how many decimals should we use? We see here we have numbers. Sometimes we have this has 3 decimals, this has 1, this has 2, and this has 0 decimals. So, and sometimes that's okay. What does Excel show? I mean, does this really have 0 decimals? No, it has an infinite amount of decimals. They're just all 0. So because they're all 0, Excel doesn't show them. Just like this one has infinite decimals. The first decimal is a 2, the second one is a 1, and the rest are all zeros, and so it doesn't show those. There's no need to show all of that, just like there's an infinite amount of zeros in the other direction. Here, so to speak, 0,000, 10,000, and so on. But displaying it just the amount of decimals we have isn't always useful. And why is that? Because it looks just visually like this number is bigger than this one, just because there are more digits here. So because there's 5 digits, well, here there's only 4, it could seem like this is 10 times bigger roughly than this one, or so on. So it's so we get a misinformation on the size, and it's sort of a taxing to us. We have to look closely. Oh yeah, no, actually this is 1,000, and this is only 200. So this is 1,200. That's 200. So this one is bigger than that one. So how can we change that? Well, the best thing to do, and this is in general, is to have the same amount of decimals. So that way we can easily compare them. So how do we do that? How do we make this to be the same amount of decimals? Well, the easiest way to do that is up here, this little decimals back and forwards bar. So this one increases the decimals, this one decreases it, and we can just press it to see what happens. So I'll try it with 1 first. I'll try this one here. I increase, and I see we just add those decimals, those infinite zeros in that direction. We now say, okay, we'll show a couple of them, show 3. And then I say, well, I don't want to show 3, so go remove those, so to speak. And we can do it all for the same time. So I select all this by clicking here and just selecting all of it. I can, so I did that by just clicking and dragging down. We can also do a short command. We can press Shift and our arrow key to jump down for a selection. We can also press Control Shift. Remember, Control and arrow keys make us jump, as we remember from the previous video. If we press Control Shift and arrow down, we select everything up until the next empty cell. And for Mac, it's Command Shift and down. Or if we were here, Command in Mac and Control on PC, Shift and up, and we select everything. So if we select everything, we can now change all these cells, their decimals at the same time. Now, this says, well, give us 1 more decimal. This one says, give us 1 less. So if we say, give us 1 more, will that mean that all of these will get 1 more decimal? No. This and that would have been that could have been useful in some cases, but oftentimes we select all of it because we want them to have the same amount of decimals. And so what this means is this will change them to have all the same amount of decimals by giving them 1 more to the first cell, or the selected cell. What does it mean by selected cell? I've selected all these cells. Well, the one that of these selected cells that I'm in right now, which is the one highlighted in white. So if I go like this, we see it's this one that's selected. If I go like this, it's the top one. We'll take that cell and we'll increase, if we click this one, increase it to 1 more decimal. And then so it will go from 2 decimals to 3. And then we'll change all the other ones to also have 3, the same amount. So let's see what happens. So I'll click here, and we see all of them get 3. So nothing happened to the bottom one because that already had 3, and the others, they all got 3 decimals. So let's press Control Z to undo, or Command C on the Mac. Now, what happens if I do the opposite, if I remove one? If I go decrease decimals, that means we'll remove one of these decimals, so only show the 2 here. It doesn't remove it, just doesn't show it, so it rounds to 1 decimal. Now, 0.21 rounded is 0.2. If it had been 0.25 or 0.26, it would have rounded to 0.3. So, but then it will round it to 0.2, so it doesn't sort of delete it or cut it off, it just rounds. And if I decrease it, we'll get 225.2, and it will do the same for the ones below, as in they'll give them 1 decimal each. So this one will be 1, so 1 less, this one will be 1 more, this one will stay the same, this one will be 2 less. So let's see what happens. And there we go. And I can click it one more time to put it to 0. The classic mistake to do when we're doing this kind of formatting is if we do this kind of selection here, we see that the number selected here, highlighted in white, has no decimals, and then we click, oh, I don't want to have any decimals, so I decrease. But obviously, we're decreasing from this standpoint. It doesn't have any decimals, so we can't remove a decimal, so we'll get an error sound. Let's see what happens. Oh, it didn't. That's interesting. It worked this time. That might be an upgrade, actually, because it used to be that wasn't the case. You usually have to go the opposite way. Interesting. So sometimes on some versions, or maybe on your version of Excel, you get an error sound there, and what you can do is just go the opposite direction, and so we'll go back and forth. So I choose these, and I remove all the decimals. And oftentimes we don't want to have decimals, and we don't want to have too many decimals in general, because they usually don't add that much. So we want to think about how we display things. Don't display too many decimals. It will just make things look cluttered and hard to see what we're doing. So if these are our values, we see now that when they have the same amount of decimals, we can easily tell which one is bigger and smaller. So we see that these ones are bigger than those two. But we also, and that's true for even if we have a few decimals here, we see that these ones are bigger than those ones. But if we remove all decimals as we did, it also becomes cleaner and easier to see what's going on. And we want to take note a little bit. We don't want to have too many decimals, and we don't want to display too many decimals. Why is that? Well, let me write here in a number with a bunch of decimals. So let's see what happens. What happened is shows none of the decimals. And why is that the case? Because Excel is somewhat smart and tries to somewhat understand what you do. So because I wrote this in the cell underneath this one, it interprets it, well, you probably, because you didn't want any decimals in these cells, you probably don't want any decimals in this one. But if I click over here, 2.3, for example, or over here, 2.35, and we can write a bunch of decimals, we see what's going on. We see it rounds them. I don't display all decimals, I display enough to fit in this cell, and which is a certain amount here. But I might not want that many. What happens if I have too big of a number or too many things to show? Let's just write a really big number here. Well, here it changed. We see that it changed the size of the column, but also it changed the formation of it. Became this E plus 18. Now we don't have to go into that, but let me do a somewhat big like that. And what happens if we have too many decimals or too many like this? Let me make it smaller. So when it's a little bit smaller, and how did I make it smaller? I just made it smaller by going up here, and when I get this little symbol here of the bar with the 2 arrows, I can change the width of this column. And we see I get these hashtags. And what do they mean? They mean that the number, or what I'm trying to display here, is too big for me to see here. So it's not going to show it. And why is that? Because if it only showed part of the number, we see here it's 2613546. Or if I drag this out, we'll see the whole number. If I only showed part of the number, it would be an accurate picture of the number. Because we see up here, now it changes to that format. That's a little bit annoying. There we go. We see here this one, it does cut off. Why does it cut off this one and not this one? Because this one is decimals, so it will round them. So we'll round this to 2 decimals. So this is 2, rounded of course, but close enough. This is 2.37. And if we think that this is exactly 2.37, we'll be wrong because it's not, it's rounded. But we won't be that far off the truth. But if it only showed a few digits here, the first 3, 261, we'd think it'd be, if it only said 261, then we'd think in this cell it was the number 261, but it isn't. We see if I hover over it, we get a little sign there that says 2613546. It's a much bigger number. So it can't display all of that information, and hence it gives these hashtags. So this hashtag just means it's too big. And the best way to change that is to go up here and make it either bigger or a quick way to do that is to just double click. And if we double click on this width, when we get this sort of width symbol, it automatically changes the width of the column to be big enough to display all the cells we have. So because this one was had a lot of decimals, it becomes big enough to display all the decimals in this. So that's ways to fix that. So that's what we should know if we get numbers, and it can sometimes happen just by accident. If we zoom in and out, we might get those. So just hashtags means it doesn't have enough space to show everything it wants to show.